Okay? And so somebody tell me, what was one of those pillars, the best that you can remember? You can do the English or an explanation, or and these 5 pillars are critical when we deal with Islam. Anybody want to take a stab at one? No pun intended. Okay. Confession, okay, that's known as the shahada, the confession. This is what makes a person Muslim, to confess there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. So that is the shahada. That was very good to start us off with, because that's what I would consider number 1, Barb. All right, or Barbara. Do you go by Barb? Well, you do today. Yeah, people that you like a whole lot more than me call you Barb, so it's okay if I do. No, I'm just teasing. All right, another one. Prayer, known as salat, okay? Prayer 5 times a day. In some places, 3 times a day, but 5 times a day generally for most of Islam. So prayer or salat, all right? Fasting. Psalm, I remember that one because fasting makes you somber. So it's psalm, fasting, okay? John? Jihad, okay, it's number 6. Not considered one of the 5, but we're going to leave it. We're going to put it there. But jihad, meaning internal struggle against essentially sin, or in more militant, radical groups, the killing of the infidel, which we are one, but not the only one. So, pilgrimage, known as Hajj, should be done by every good Muslim once in their lifetime, which is a long flight from here to Saudi Arabia, starting in Mecca, where Muhammad grew up, traveling to Medina, where Muhammad died, and traveling back to Mecca, which Muhammad did in his lifetime. So we'll talk about that is Hajj, and there's one more. Zakat, giving of alms, or giving to the poor, or giving back to God. Okay, so very good. Those are the 6 pillars. Again, the major 5, shahada, confession, salat, prayers, hajj. Again, remember hajj carries more weight. Remember the key illustration of Islam is the scales, because you have a recording angel with every single person recording your good deeds and bad deeds, and whether they weigh more good deeds or bad deeds towards the end. So salat, prayers, hajj carries more weight, zakat, alms giving, and fasting, psalm. Okay? So good thing to remember. That's one of the major things to think about and remember with Islam. So that's what we're going to talk about. All right, so we're going to go to the next slide. So Islam considers itself as the original religion. Well, now wait a second. He wasn't even born until 570. Begins to, I'll look at that in a second. But so how is this the original religion? Well, 570. Okay, I should trust myself. And so 570 is when Muhammad is born, but how is it the original religion? Well, it's the original religion according to Islam, that all other books of which they respect, including the Bible, Christians and Jews are called people of the book, even by Muhammad within the Quran. And so this is the understanding of what's taken place. But again, he views that these other religions are corrupt, and Islam is the original religion that God intended. So that's the key understanding. Since the beginning of time, all those who submit, and that's the key word, that's what Muslim means, who submit or surrender to Allah, these are Muslims. And Allah has had 124,000 prophets, including Isa al-Misa, Jesus, Adam, Moses, David, Isaiah, many of the prophets of the Bible, certainly. Noah is another major prophet within Islam. So this is where, especially when we think about sharing our faith with a Muslim, what we're talking about and dealing with is the fact that we have many things in common with Muslims. And the best way to enter in that relationship and friendship is to talk about the common things that we share before we get to the differences. We need to be able to talk about the differences, but establishing the relationship and talking about the commonalities is always something great to do. All right, some general facts about Islam. So we're going to hit some of these. Now, by the way, Ashley, there's no way I don't think that we can cover all of this. So I'm going to skip over certain parts. You've got all the notes, but I'll skip over some parts that I don't think are as relevant for us. So 1.9, actually that's higher than that, probably closer to 2.1 to 2.3 billion people are Muslim. It is quickly catching up to Christianity and likely to surpass Christianity by 2040 in the world as current rates go. Dominant religion of the Middle East, Africa, North Africa specifically, and Asia. And I think I already said this, and sure you're going to get this, but I'm pretty sure I said this. Largest Muslim nation by percentage, Indonesia. That's right. You wouldn't think that, but so Southeast Asia is also a major hub of Islam. It's based on the one absolute conviction that Islam is a monotheistic worship of one God, and the name of the deity is Allah. Okay? We'll try to address the question, is Allah the same God of the Old Testament? That's always a great question, one for good debate, but I say no. The Prophet Muhammad provides the final and only perfect revelation of Allah. So that's the reason he is the final prophet, called the praised one, and he is the final prophet and the one who carries out the perfect revelation of Allah. Everyone else got close. Jesus, next to Muhammad, got the closest, according to Islam. So next to Muhammad, Jesus is the highest prophet within Islam. So that's a great place to begin and talk about. We'll talk about where they see him as majorly different. So a person lives only one life, and how they live in that life will determine what their eternal existence is. And again, the meaning is submission or surrender. Next, we have a timeline, which we've seen of other things before. But again, notice our timeline begins 570 years after the birth of Jesus, or close to that. So the birth of Muhammad. 610 is when he has the initial revelation given by the angel Gabriel, Archangel Gabriel, again, of Christianity and Judaistic fame, is Gabriel. And that revelation continues. It's not a single revelation. This truly is revelations. Unlike the final book of the Bible, which is one single revelation. It's not revelations. But this is multiple revelations that he has from 610 up until 622. So over a 12-year time period is when he is, quote unquote, given the words and message of the Quran. Now, in 622, there is what's called the night flight, otherwise known as the Hijra. The Hijra is when he's basically giving his monotheistic message in Mecca, and it is not well received by the polytheistic groups that are in Mecca. So he has to flee, and he flees to another major city of the time, is Medina, about 240, I believe, 240 miles. Somebody can check that, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood, 200 to 240 miles to the west of Mecca is Medina. So he flees to Medina. He gets a better audience in Medina. They follow what he says. And over the next years, the next 10 years of his life, he fights his way back to overtake finally Mecca. He overtakes Mecca, and he then is injured in a battle in 632. He makes his way back to Medina, and he dives in the arms of his later wife, whose name is Aisha. Okay? Aisha. And she's going to play a very prominent part in the story. So the return to Mecca is in 630, and the death of Muhammad after a battle is in 632. Go to the next slide. We've got, where is the winged horse? All right, when? Now, thank you for your question last week, Sam, because I went back. So how is there, Sam asked a very good question. How is there a grave for Muhammad in Medina, and yet he left the earth on a winged horse? All right, did a little bit more research. The winged horse event from which it took off from the same hill from which Isaac was to be sacrificed by Abraham, where the current Dome of the Rock is in Jerusalem. This was a spiritual journey where he went into the heavens on this winged horse and spoke with many of the prophets that had lived and then came back to earth to continue his fight. That's the story. However, some say it's a spiritual experience. Others say it was an actual journey. So, there you go. Thank you. I did my research because you brought up a really good question. All right. So, next, 633. So, here's what happens after the death of Muhammad. Here's the biggest issue. Muhammad does not leave a male heir. And we know how male-dominated the Arab world was at the time, and in many places today, still very male-dominated. So the fact that he did not have a direct male heir could have caused major problems for Islam. But between 630 and 642, they continued to spread the conquest of this particular group, and this is what we call the caliphate, from 4 noble caliphs. Sam? He did have daughters. He did have sons, but none of them survived infancy. He has one daughter that we trace everything back to. Her name is Fatima. And Fatima marries an individual named Ali, who was one of these 4 caliphs. So Ali is where we trace one major group of Islam today called the Shiites, go back to Ali. All right, so that's where that goes. Which we're all going to get to, Sam. Now stop that. You cannot ask questions. It's a sign of intelligence, but it's also a sign of irritation. No, I'm just teasing. Go ahead. Yes. Well, these are my pictures. Well, maybe somebody who didn't care about Islam drew them. Yeah, but they don't like drawing images of Muhammad. It is frowned upon in most establishments. That is true. 691, interesting. Okay, death of Hussein. Who in the world is Hussein? This is the son of Fatima and Ali. He dies. But death of Hussein is really not the issue. He is killed by Sunni Islam. And this is therefore the biggest break in Islam happens in 680 when the martyrdom of Hussein happens. So, and as I said last time, within Islam you have more of a conflict within these 2 groups of Islam, Shia and Sunni, up until the 1940s. After World War II, there's a lot of things happening. I draw attention to a few of those last time. But with those things happening, we come majorly in conflict. Islam comes in conflict with the West, and it gives Shiites and Sunnis something to agree upon, and that is that we dislike the West for the most part. So this split then between Sunni and Shiites fully takes place in 693, but it began in 680. We have the emergence of another branch called Sufism. It's what I call the Pentecostal branch of Islam. Now that may be weird to you, but Pentecostalism, very emotional, very experience related, seeking an experience. Sometimes more than theology, it's seeking a particular personal experience, and this is Sufism. Sufism also, if you've ever watched what is called twirlers, and I'm not talking like this, I'm talking like this, okay? And the dresses rise of men and women, I say dresses, robes, whatever, they'll rise. These are the Sufis. The Sufis are twirlers. And again, by doing that round and round, they're seeking a mystical expression of Islam. And so that is Sufism. Go to the next one. We continue the Abbasid dynasty and then the Crusades, 1095 to 1270. But one other thing I wanted to mention, can you go back to the last one, Ashley? I forgot to mention this one. Notice the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. That happens quite early. This is only 60 years after Muhammad dies. So the fact that they get to Jerusalem, that Islam gets to Jerusalem and conquers this area and takes over the old Temple Mount is a huge thing. But that happens in 691. You'd think, well, that happened during the Crusades. No, the Crusades are a reaction to the fact that that has already happened back in 691. So we can go to the next one. So again, the Crusades primarily 1095 to 1270. And by the way, the Crusades is not one singular event. It's a lot of different crusades. And so there are some crusades that are Christians versus Islam. There are some crusades that are Christians against Jews and Muslims. There are some crusades that are Jews and Christians against Islam. It's just a lot of fighting over this Holy Land area by many, many different groups and different people. The reconquest of Spain, and Muslims are expelled, 1492, but it's not just Muslims that are expelled. What did we learn with Judaism? Jews are also expelled. This is a Spanish Inquisition. So Roman Catholicism casts all these groups out of Spain. And then we bring it up to a little bit more modern day. Shiite Islam emerges in 1501. It began earlier, but it begins to really emerge as a major force in the 1500s. Then Wahhabi Islam, okay? This has nothing to do with the hot sauce from Japan. Has nothing to do, that's wasabi. This is Wahhabi, okay? Now, Wahhabi Islam is this. It's the particular branch of Islam that is in Saudi Arabia. You may have wondered on the geopolitical stage, why does Saudi Arabia not like Iran? Well, they don't, and this is the reason why. It's Wahhabi Islam in Saudi Arabia. Best thing you can, the Prince of Saud or Saud, the Saud family, red and white checkered headdress, that's Wahhabi Islam, and it's primarily almost only in Saudi Arabia. So this is another group. So far, Shiite, Sunni's 85%, so we'll talk more about them, Sufis, and then Wahhabi Islam. So we have nationalistic movements, Ottoman Empire, which is a significant, but 1918, what's happened right before 1918? World War I, okay? Go to the next one. And modern state of Israel in 1948, that's a big issue. It gives another reason for Islam to come against, because again, the areas all around Syria, Jordan, which was supposed to be part of Israel back in the Balfour Declaration of 1914, but it's not. But it emerges in 1948, but you've got Egypt, you've got Saudi Arabia right near there as well. So all these areas are Muslim, and you've got Israel coming into power and coming into being at this particular time. The Iran Revolution, which was huge. Many of you remember the Iranian hostages. So that happened in the 80s, the late 70s, early 80s. And Taliban rule in 1996. So keep in mind, who was fighting the Taliban before we were? Russia. Okay? Russia was fighting the Taliban for a long, long time before the United States ever got involved in this conflict. And then, of course, next slide is the biggest emphasis and why the classes that I've taught have been so full has been in 2001. Now, most of my students, they weren't born in 2001. So they don't know anything about it. But all they know is there is a sense that something seems different. Islam to them, quite honestly, is a religion that they've understood to just be beaten up by people for some unknown reason. Well, the known reason for us is what happened on 9/11. We've got some history that students that are currently in college don't have. And that's very important for us to remember. They don't have this history of some general animosity potentially to a particular group. All right? And so, again, that brings us up to where we are essentially today. All right, we'll go next. Okay, I haven't been following myself here. All right, so what's going on? So this is known as the Kaaba. Say that with me. Kaaba. So the Kaaba is a huge obelisk sitting in the middle of the largest mosque in Mecca. This is the most holy site of Islam. Inside this is an ancient meteorite believed in the story of Islam that Abraham and his son Ishmael built the first structure around this particular meteorite. But it was worshipped by many polytheistic groups in the time of Muhammad. Muhammad lived and was a part of what's called the Quraysh clan. He grew up in Mecca, but his clan was responsible for taking care of the Kaaba. So he grew up around this with lots of religious fervor. But it had been filled with images, paintings, such as Mary and baby Jesus as well. There were all kinds of images within this that eventually were cleared out when Islam became a primarily monotheistic religion. But prior to that, there was all kinds of different beliefs in many gods in Arabia. That's who originally Muhammad fights against, is all of the polytheistic groups, because his message is very radical to those groups. His message is there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. So that's the reason that declaration is so important. And this is a significant difference from where they had been in all kinds of polytheism. So pre-Islamic peoples filled with polytheistic beliefs are practicing this, and it's around the Kaaba. Now, it didn't look like this, and there wasn't a mosque built around it. But nevertheless, this was still an ancient religious site even before Muhammad came around. All right? Well, it was an ancient meteorite. And if you see an ancient meteorite, you're just going to build a structure around it. So we have no knowledge that Abraham was ever in this particular region. The area where Abraham grew up is north of here, but then he went to Canaan, Palestine, modern-day Palestine, and again, all of our stories involve Abraham with Isaac. What I'm saying is, all the stories within the Quran are Abraham and Ishmael. Many of the same stories that we know of Abraham and Isaac are retold as Abraham and Ishmael in the Quran. Where did he get these stories? We're going to get to that. So where did he understand this? So basically what Muhammad says that he's doing is correcting these other religions who got it wrong. So that's the reason many of these stories are very, very familiar in that. Terry?
Since this law is in Saudi Arabia and they're Wahhabi, so they're okay with the Sunnis and the Shias, millions of them coming over there.
What do Saudis love more than anything? Now just contemplate 2 billion people who have to come and spend money in your country for a religious pursuit. So more than their belief system, they like the money. All right, so that's my take on it anyway. But it's also a sense that they don't want to prohibit other Muslims, even though they don't like them, to come and experience this. So now I've not ever seen this. I've never been to Saudi Arabia, and not exactly on my top 400 list of places that I want to visit. But nevertheless, I'm sure there's still animosity, but some of the things that we're going to see that happen during the Hajj remove some of that, and probably intentionally as a result of that. Oh, great. Okay, there we go. All right, let's go to the next one. So let's learn a little bit about Muhammad's life, because this is key. Muhammad is born in 570, again in the Quraysh tribe. But his father, who's named as Abd Allah, he dies before Muhammad's ever born. Now, what does this create? We talk about this a lot, or some around here, is this vision and understanding of God as Father, okay? Muhammad removes all of this from the worship of Allah, is he cannot be seen as Father. If I were to psychoanalyze Muhammad, I would say he has major father issues and he has major grief issues. So you want to talk about service of remembrance that's coming up in December. There's major grief that we're going to see in the life of Muhammad. And I just want us to pay attention to that. Not that we're seeking to have all kinds of compassion for Muhammad, but every person, no matter where they are or what they do, there's a reason they are who they are. Okay? So we're going to see some of that. By the age of 6, his mother also dies. So he has no father and no mother. And he is raised by his uncle who's named Abu Talib. Abu Talib becomes the major influence of his life at this point, from the age of 6 on. Now, he works in camel caravans, again, the modern day trucking of today, because caravans are how goods are going to be received and moved from one place to the other. These are on major trade routes. And guess where the major trade routes from Saudi Arabia go? Alexandria, Egypt, Palestine, Jerusalem, up into Syria, and majorly over into Persia. So he's coming into contact with all the major monotheistic religions of the world. Zoroastrian, much bigger in the time than it is today, Judaism, and Christianity. He also travels over near Rome, because Rome is the major area of the time. He is able to utilize what we now know as the Roman road. It is not just a series of scriptures through which you lead people to faith in Christ. It was an actual road, all right? And it was transformational of the time, what's called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. The Roman road was a key part of that because it gave a pathway to get to all these major cities. But the key point of Islam is, and Rachel, would you go shut that door over there now that everybody's likely here? The key issue here is he was in these caravans. Well, there was a lady who owned a caravan. She was a very wealthy widow. Her name is Khadijah. And she became the first wife of Muhammad. She is 40 years of age when he is 25. So I say she is the major cougar of Islam. Now, I said that in my class the other day, and I got a email and then had to apologize. I stepped over a line. And you guys, here's what I know. Jennifer asked me this the other day. She goes, why do you sometimes say the things you say? I said, babe, here's the thing. I never know if I've stepped over the line until I look back and see it, okay? So this is how I've lived my life. I say things first and think about them later. Why are you laughing, Shauna? All right, she's seen me do this for many, many years. All right, so, but she's 40 and she's wealthy. So let me just tell you, if you're going to build a religion, you would like to have wealth, because what does that give you? Power and time. Okay? If you can assume a position where you're controlling other people's lives, it gives you time to think about other things. And this is exactly what he did. So he begins to spend time in the desert. He is very concerned and compassionate towards his people. And so this begins to give way to this understanding of what's going to happen. This is the reason I don't like devices, because they go to sleep on me, and I hate that. So if you weren't here earlier, I was trying to print off notes on the copier, and it was giving me blank pieces of paper. So perhaps there was really stuff on the paper, and I just wasn't spiritual enough to see them. Now we're getting into Mormonism, which we're coming back to later. All right, that'll be a funny joke when we get to Mormonism, okay? But it's not so funny right now. So 570. Oh wait, we're going to the next one. Sorry. Yeah, Ashley. So he begins to have these revelations around this place called Mount Hira, and these revelations that he begins to have from the angel Gabriel. The first saying, there is no God but Allah, so extreme monotheism. He begins to have these, and this is what becomes the Quran. Now, according to Islam, the Quran is also supernatural, because we believe that Muhammad was illiterate, and therefore that he could write the Quran, according to Islam, that this is one of the major pieces of Islam in being absolutely miraculous, because he was actually believed to be illiterate. So he sees God as this one individual, Allah, or not individual, but one deity in a world of polytheism, and he begins to preach this to the people of Mecca. Not well received, so he has to flee. Now, understand that the whole jihad, John, initially was fighting against the infidels. And who were the infidels at the time for Muhammad? They were polytheistic Arabs. But it came to also mean, especially for later groups, Christians and Jews. Muhammad had a high respect for Christians and Jews because he called them people of the book. Islam holds high value in the Bible, both Old Testaments and New, but not in the way that Christians and Jews have misrepresented them. Only in the way that Islam has rewritten them to help actually understand them. But they will follow the Bible. Now, a key event happens in his life in 619. 619, he's not yet, keep in mind, this is key because he's not yet had, or he's in the middle of having these revelations, okay? In 619, Abu Talib and Khadijah, his wife, both die in the same year. Mother, father, wife, uncle who cared for him, all gone. Major crisis of belief, major crisis of grief that he's experiencing. So this is key in us understanding what's actually happening. 622, he flees to Medina and called the Hijrah, the migration. And in 623, he marries Aisha, who's the daughter of a key friend of his, Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr eventually becomes the person who takes Islam after Muhammad's death. So Abu Bakr and Ali are two of these caliphs, along with a man named Uthman, which we'll get to in just a second. All right, so in 627, 10,000 folks from Mecca journey over to Medina and attack Medina, but they hold them off and defeat them, and eventually he makes his way back to Mecca, conquers it in 630, but then is injured in 632 and dies in the arms of Aisha, his second wife. But didn't Muhammad have multiple wives? And the answer is yes. According to Islam, he has multiple wives because many of his soldiers die in battle and leave their wives and children, and he takes them in. So that is the Islamic understanding of that. But up to 4 wives are allowed for every Muslim man today in countries that would allow that. Up to 4, you can have up to 4 wives, but they must be treated equally. Okay. All right. I'm not going to anger anyone else in an attempt today, but that's not very smart. Okay. Not very smart at all. Okay. I try to treat one wife equally, and that's hard enough. Chris Lunsford has told me that his wife is wonderful and she should always be treated equally. Not equally, but above all other women. Isn't that right, Amy? Okay. That's what Christopher Lunsford tells me, and I want to declare it here today. All right, so when Muhammad dies, what's the key issue? And I'm coming back to your question. There's no successor, and Abu Bakr takes over because he is the most senior. But then, somewhere along the way, Ali starts to take some prominence. And so, bottom line is, conflict begins almost immediately within Islam. Shauna? Well, we don't. Don't know. Yeah, most Muslim, that's simply by percentage. I don't know. Certainly Saudi Arabia, certainly Afghanistan, likely Iran, Iraq. So, but I don't know I don't specifically know the countries that do allow it and don't. John? Yes, Persia. Persia is actually a little of Iran and Iraq, but yes, mainly Iran. You are correct. All right. So let's go on to the next one. We'll do this one very quickly. But the Quran is then known as the holy book of Islam. And there's only one version that is accepted as holy. Uthman, a third caliph who's alive right after Muhammad, one of Muhammad's friends, gathers up any version that's been out there and burns them except for one. And this becomes the authorized version of the Quran. Now, the understanding about this is it's only holy in Arabic, and it's only holy when spoken in Arabic. That's the reason, when we see in just a second some architecture of Islam, they have what's called a minaret. And at the top of the minaret is where the person will go up and sing out the Quran. Allahu Akbar. And it's very melodic. By the way, Jewish prayers are the same. So both of these religions are basically sung in this process. So when we talk about the Psalms, they are actually songs that are being sung, these prayers that are being sung. So this is what's happening in Islam. Only holy, its most holy form in Arabic, and only when spoken. There are a group of people who commit the whole Quran to memory, and they're known as the Hafiz. The Hafiz. But all of the Quran is eternal, absolute, perfect, errorless, and irrevocable words of Allah. And anything that's said within the Quran must be submitted to, because it is considered the absolute will of Allah. Now, in the teachings of Allah, what does Allah teach? Well, there's one God. He has 99 names. There's a beaded necklace, looks much like the rosary, with 99 beads, the 99 names of God. Allah the compassionate, Allah the beneficial, the beneficent. These are certain names of Allah. So you use the necklace to state the 99 names, and it's said that only the camel knows the 100th name of Allah, just to get it to completion. So righteous persons win Allah's approval by submission. But also within the Quran is the devil, known as Iblis. Iblis is Satan, and the spirits are called jinns. Jinns, not Jen, the name of my spouse. So we would never call her an evil spirit. No, we wouldn't. All right, but jinns are the evil spirits, and Iblis is Satan. Again, all kinds of similarities between Christianity and Islam. Why is that? One more time, just so we have it clear. Because he was influenced by all these religions. Zoroastrianism and Islam have virtually the exact same what happens when you die. Almost the exact same. So, Muhammad, in my personal opinion, is borrowing from all of these religions as he is creating the Quran. But don't think that the Quran is going to be narrative. It's not. All right? It is not a narrative piece. He doesn't borrow that. He kind of tells these stories, but they're very disjointed. The Quran is actually written, its chapters are things like the cow. You know, it's just, and this is going to talk about the cow, but it talks about it in kind of poetic language that is not very intelligible to me as I have read it in English, certainly not in Arabic. All right. There are teachings then on predestination. Predestination is huge when it comes to Allah. Now follow the logic of this. If God is all powerful, what does he know? Everything. And so everything is viewed as predestination. We have a view, we have an understanding and a belief, I personally do, of predestination. My personal belief of predestination is simply like this. That is what I'm seeing. I'm on this side and I'm seeing something from this side, and it looks like I have free will and choice, because to me, that's my reality. God is on this side of the equation. And as he looks at everything, he knows exactly what's going to happen. But from my side of predestination, I still have free will and choice. But from God's side, he already knows what's going to happen. That may not work for you, but it works for me in that. So predestination is certainly something hard to fully understand. But in the Islamic world, in the understanding is that Allah is so powerful and so holy that he can't be approached, and everything is predestined, because you can't do anything that Allah doesn't know about. So predestination is huge within the understanding of Islam. We're going to go on to the next thing. Eschatology, things what happen at the end. So again, with Zoroastrianism, which we didn't study, but here's what happens in Zoroastrian. Did we study Zoroastrianism? No, we didn't. Okay. I'm sorry. I teach these things through the semester and I forget what I've taught one place and what I've taught another. All right. But there is what's called the Chinvat Bridge in Zoroastrianism. And what that means is that when you die, you go on a journey, and your journey takes you across a rope bridge. And if you've done good things, it stays stable. And if you don't, it sways violently. Okay? Many of us have had dreams about like that, all right? So we're on this bridge. But matter of fact, if you watch some of these competitions now, they're having people walk across this bridge or run. They have to run across it, and they usually end up in the water. But nevertheless, that's what this is. And on the other side waits a single virgin in Zoroastrianism. Well, Muhammad takes it and says, no, we're going to make it 70 virgins. Now, what I don't know is what awaits a female in in Islam. I don't know the answer to that. So don't let that be your first question also, okay? But you might lead up to that as to what's available for a female if she makes it across. So the whole idea is, just like Zoroastrianism, a journey begins. I believe this is one of the reasons why when someone in Islam dies, they want them to be buried as quickly as possible. Judaism is the same. I do not believe they drain the blood. I know in Judaism they would not tend to, because that's definitely frowned upon in Judaism. I think it's frowned upon in Islam as well. So a quick burial is of necessity, but the real reason is because they're going immediately on this journey. Within 3 days of death, they go on this journey. And so they're traveling across this bridge. And if they've kept the 5 pillars really well, the bridge is going to be stable. And if not, it could throw them into hell. But there's still a chance for you, even if you get thrown into hell. We'll come to that in just a few minutes. So,
is it like purgatory?
No, not in a sense of purgatory. It is. There's no understanding of purgatory within Islam. Well, don't move your hand like that, Colin. If we were in auction, you just bought the farm, my friend. All right. So this is a key understanding. So it brings in a condition what's called soul sleep. Now, there are Christians who believe in soul sleep as well. That what happens is that we don't actually die. We just go into a period of soul sleep, but it's not exactly heaven. Just know, I don't believe that. Absent from the body, present with the Lord is what I believe. There's appointed upon a man one chance, one time to die, and then to face judgment. And those two things don't happen immediately in the sense of the great white throne judgment, but they do happen immediately in the sense that you're either in heaven, which is with God, or separated from God, which is hell. Okay, so that's my belief, but they do hold a view of soul sleep, but I just need you to understand there are Christians who hold that same view as well. All right. Religious institutions in Islam, there you have it. Feel free to go back and read that. We're not going to, but I want to take you to the next one. So inside an actual mosque, there we go. So in Indonesia, it was in Jakarta, and got to go into the largest mosque in Asia, and that is in Jakarta, made of 2 materials. Everything that's metal, which are the railings, and the ceiling is all German stainless steel, and everything else is a red veined marble, which is Indonesian marble, and so that's on all the walls and floors. It was 4 levels, if I remember, 3 or 4. The balconies are from this front of the stage a little bit deeper than the back wall, and they go around 3 sides. So let's imagine this is what's called the mimbar, which is the pulpit, which is where they're going to speak from. And again, the back of the mimbar always faces, or the back of it is east. So if we're really talking about this, the mimbar would be here, and around 3 sides are these balconies. Balconies that will hold a lot of people when they're standing or kneeling. Okay? So this particular mosque, I'm quite sure, would have held over 100,000 people. So you have the floor, level 1, level 2, level 3 balconies around 3 sides. So often within prayer of Islam, you are separating, always you're separating men from women. It is either side by side, but most often it is men in the front and women in the back. Okay? And again, the reason is because you're never going to put women in the front, because men who are behind women are not going to focus on prayer. That's the thought. That's the reason, whether we like it or not, that's the reason. Quakers do the same, some of the same things. And again, the idea is to remove distraction. What you need to understand, that's also the reason for much of Muslim dress, is that you cover the whole body so that women don't become an object of men. And so these are the reasons given, and we're going to show some the different dress of Islam, but that's the reason. You need to understand it is to remove the sexual temptation or sexual allure is the reason. Shauna? Yeah. I don't recall that there's any sense of design of a mosque. Now keep in mind, for the temple there was one. So there is one place of worship. Matter of fact, I was watching an old show today. I won't name it, but Shauna knows what it is. There was a Jewish person on there, and he said he always went to temple. I'm like, that's wrong. He lived in New York. He didn't go to temple. He went to a synagogue. There was only one temple in Judaism, but there are many mosques. And now some are more holy than others because of the place in which they are. But I don't recall anything in the Quran giving any type of design elements for this. That'd be a great research project for you, Shauna, is where did the architectural designs of mosque emerge within Islam? Sam would love to be your research partner on that and help you out on that. All right, so some of the things in this, again, the minaret you'll notice is the tall tower. Often there's two at both corners, so that's another key design that's happening today. The wudu area is this outer courtyard, so also can be used for prayers if the regular location is full, but the wudu area is the place where there's this fountain. Congregational prayers are inside, women's area separated either front and back or side to side. Next, you'll see the Dome of the Rock. We've talked about it. So, again, this is the most desired piece of real estate in all the world. If you go with Bart and Hope, you will get to see the Dome of the Rock, and you'll be on, just below the Dome of the Rock is the western wall of the old temple, and that is now known as the Wailing Wall. And so it's still owned by Islam, the ground above it, but not the wall itself. So Jews are there all day, every day, and they'll stick prayers into the wall of the old temple, believing that one day the temple will be restored. All right? Mary, you've been to Israel most recently. Am I speaking truth here? Okay. All right. Tell me if you had to imagine, how much property would the Dome of the Rock actually sit on? I say 2 acres. Is that? Okay. I should have known that. By the way, Mary used to be the registrar of TCU. We have someone famous in our midst with this. All right. So here is a picture inside the Dome of the Rock, and literally, what's in the middle? It's a rock, and that's exactly what it is. And so there is a railing around the Dome of the Rock. So the rock is believed to be the place where the winged horse left on this spiritual journey, and supposedly there's an imprint that looks like a horse's hoof. By the way, I've also been to the top of the ancient capital city in Laos, and there's a little shed that says the footprint of Buddha. And Bart and I were there, and our friend John, not Avanchan, another John, and we're like, oh, look. And so we go in, and I kid you not, the footprint of Buddha is like this big. We found Bigfoot, and it's actually Buddha, okay? And by the way, my name, if you're watching this video, is Bart Howell. Bart at eaglesview.church is where you can send your hate mail for that. What's that?
It's built within a 36-acre plot, but the dome itself is on 6 acres.
Oh, on 6 acres. So this is larger. I've been lying to students for a long time. So 36 acres. That's a lot bigger than I thought it was. But this, yeah, the dome is just in one area in around 6 acres. But here's the deal. There is no way that building is 6 acres. Yeah, there's no way that it's that big. Because I've seen it actually inside, a picture of it inside, and that dome, that rock itself is only about this large, and then it covers an area around it for a walkway. But anyway, I will. Well, this is the mosque. What you're seeing is the mosque. Is there another mosque next to it, you think? Okay, that may be the whole piece of property. It has that. But the Dome of the Rock, again, so this is also the area at which David ruled in this area, and it was a key significant spot for David. And then this is where Isaac, we believe that Abraham took Isaac up onto the mount, and this is what's known as the Temple Mount. And it became the Temple Mount largely because this is where it was believed that Isaac was going to be sacrificed, and God provided a way. And again, in the Quran, it's going to say Ishmael, not Isaac. Okay? Those are going to get more and more interesting. Now, we move to something we've already covered, so we won't cover it here. But again, there are the 6 pillars of Islam. You will only hear of 5, but we know that the 6th one, the reason jihad is mentioned there is because in the radical groups, there is only one way that you can assure yourself of going to heaven, and it's jihad. When you die for your faith, this is immediate entry by the radical groups. But the non-radical groups have termed this an internal struggle against sin, is what jihad actually is. Now, that gives us to the Hajj, which is the pilgrimage. So what is happening in the pilgrimage? And this is where I came back, Terry, to this. And why do they do this? Why would Wahhabi Islam allow all these other people in? Well, one thing that you do is the first thing you do, men shave their heads. Men shave their heads, and everyone wears a white robe, men and women. You are on a pilgrimage, and everyone wears the same clothing. During this portion, you're also fasting, abstaining from sexual intercourse, not cutting your hair until you get to a particular place in the Hajj when you shave your head, but you're not cutting your hair up until this point or your nails. And you make 7 trips around the Kaaba to begin your journey. And what city are you in? Mecca. Okay, you're going around the Kaaba, which is in Mecca, which we noticed earlier. You visit Zamzam. You go to the Mount of Mercy, and again, you gather. Number 6 is fun. The Muzdalifah. This is where you're gathering stones, and what do you think you're doing with the stones? You're going to stone Satan. Now, this would be fun. So you're actually theoretically or metaphorically, you are stoning Satan, but that just seems fun. I think I'm going to make that. You guys come to the area of woods in my backyard, and we're going to stone Satan there. We're going to make an effigy of Satan, and we're going to stone him. So that just seems like fun. All right, there's a blood sacrifice. Then number 9 is the cutting of hair, because Sam, you were thinking you can't cut your hair. Well, wait a second, you just said they're all bald. That happens at step number 9, all right? Now, in this process, they've gone all these places, Zamzam, the Mount of Mercy. This is towards Medina. So why are they doing this? Because this is what Muhammad did. This is a commemoration. This is a ritual. Now, before we think about it as a ritual, do we have a ritual that we commemorate? We did it last week. Communion. What are we commemorating? The Last Supper of Jesus with his disciples. And when we do so, you remember me. I wonder why Muhammad wanted a commemoration of these things. All right? See these similarities. Make note of them. All right? And then you make a final walk around the Kaaba, and then you return home, and this completes the Hajj. So, some are tour buses. I'm sure there are groups that walk 200 miles, and it takes much longer than a month. But again, there's all kinds of money being made in the pilgrimage, in the Hajj in Saudi Arabia. All right? Which brings us to what are the fundamentals? What are the key beliefs of Islam? Well, we've talked about some of these already, but a singular God, monotheistic, whose name is Allah. Holy books, the Quran. Now, what's the Hadith? The Hadith is how Muhammad lived his life. The closest understanding for us would be the Gospels. We see how Jesus lived his life. But the Hadith's really not like that. It's not stories of Muhammad. It's more what Muhammad did. Even to the point of bathroom rituals. Okay? Yeah. Things that you would do in the bathroom. Which is why the key understanding is, if you're in a Muslim country, you always give gifts with your right hand. Why? Do what?
Cell phones, she said.
I don't understand. I didn't get the joke. It's wasted upon me. I'm sorry. Because the left hand is used in the bathroom. And the right hand, you always extend the right hand if you're giving a gift. Okay? You don't ever touch someone with any hand other than the right hand. So again, just key things to remember as we do this. But that's what the Hadith deals with. It deals with, instead of WWJD, it's WWMD, is what would Muhammad do, and that's the Hadith. Now, there are significant differences because I believe it's the Shiites that don't follow the Hadith. They only follow the Quran. But the Sunnis follow both the Hadith and the Quran as key holy books. So there are things that happen within these groups, and we're going to get to the specifics of those groups in just a second. Supernaturals is another, or I missed Day of Judgment is another key fundamental. Supernaturals, angels, Satan, and jinns. Prophets, the 124,000. Don't get that confused with 144,000 in Revelation. 124,000 prophets from Adam all the way to Muhammad. And how do we know up to Muhammad? Because he is the final prophet. Known as the seal of the prophets, which just mean God put his seal on Muhammad according to Islam. He was the last. Okay? And then predestination is another of the fundamentals of Islam. Now, we're not going to go into the next, but I want you to know what this is. We're going to talk about it just a little bit. Islam and women. Again, Islam allows 4 wives if you treat them all equally. Divorce is relatively easy in some Muslim nations. Now, I get a lot of pushback on that. There actually are a lot of rights for Islamic women as it relates to divorce. You can't, it says it's easy. I've been told, no, it's really not easy. But it's certainly still a male-dominated world, but it's within the covenant of marriage, if they call it a covenant, and I don't really know. I would say it's probably more of a contract. There are things that wives get if a husband doesn't want them any longer. All right? But women can have property, but they are often subject to seclusion. And again, in Saudi Arabia today, ladies, you cannot go to the doctor by yourself. So that you must be accompanied by your husband in those places. Anybody, you have any stories about that? So Lori has worked she retired from working for the government, but she took care of any base and their children, how they would be educated. So she's worked literally with people all over the world.
We have a lot of kids right now in Saudi, but the most stories that I've found right now is from Belinda. It's interesting, our neighbor.
Yeah.
And she's actually there right
Yeah, I called her on her way to the airport yesterday.
An interesting story. She has blue eyes.
Mm.
She can't look at people because they believe that if you're blue-eyed, you have Satan.
Mm.
And so she can't look at people. She said, I guess she moved here in March, and she's just now getting to the point that
Where
she's
she'll-
comfortable with him.
Interesting. Well, I I personally think blue-eyed people are satanic as well, but that's neither here nor now. Teasing. Hey now. My mother had blue eyes, so I'm just teasing about that. All right, so again, so many of these conditions, as you well know, looking at the news and other things, it's still very much a male-dominated role. But just know, Islam, especially as it's practiced in the United States, is trying to move away from some of that being the primary thing. We're going to go 2 over. I just want to show all of the women's dress there. So this is kind of where you go in the dress of ladies in the world. So Afghanistan is the burqa is primary. That's the one on the far left. And so the burqa is totally covered with a veil over the eye slit is what it's called. So over that. So the niqab has a area open for the eyes, but it's only the eyes that can be seen. And the most prominent that I see on our campus is not the dress, but just the hijab, which talks about just the head covering. So there's still many. And I've talked to several of my students who wear this. Again, it is a choice. It is usually encouraged by the family to wear it, but I'm seeing many Muslim girls who no longer wear it. And so it is a personal choice, but it's typically encouraged by the family. So these are some different views. So again, you'll have the notes for this. So Islamic taboos is also a key. Our word for in Judaism was things that are fit to eat. And what was that word? Kosher. One word in Judaism, 2 words in Islam. Halal and haram. All right? Haram just actually sounds a little rougher, and that's the things you can't do. Okay, what are those things? Pornography, alcohol, and eating certain meats. Pork is not allowed. So again, if you love bacon, ham, or ribs, yes, you do not want to be Islamic nor Jewish. Okay, so both of these are not allowed. Donkeys and mules, not on my menu either, I understand, not necessarily there. Beast of prey, birds and beast of prey. That is birds of prey. So not all birds. So chicken is fine, but an eagle, a vulture, a falcon, anything that is a bird of prey that is killing other things is not allowed. But that is haram. Anything that's allowed is halal. So if you've ever eaten in Austin, the Halal Brothers restaurant, well, that's things that are good to eat. That's why they call it that. Terry? Have you frequented it yet?
I just went in and asked for bacon. No, I think you're just open.
No, you're with us tonight, so that's not exactly what you asked for. All right. And gambling, interestingly enough. This is the reason why when bin Laden was raided, the idea that he had caches of pornography was a big deal. And certainly by many of the followers would have said, no, they planted that. Okay, so I mean, that was a big thing. And it would have been a big offense within the world of Islam. And that's the reason why for that. Now, jihad is the next thing, but I've talked about this a lot, about what this is. Either struggle against the infidel, understanding that when the Quran was actually written, who was the infidel that Muhammad was mainly fighting? Mainly polytheistic Arabs is really who that was for the most part at that particular time. So most Muslims do not agree that 9/11 was a jihad. But what we know is it was to those who were doing it. That's the key. So, but they would still disagree with that at that point. All right. Now, the next one is, again, I'm not going to spend any time with this because we just don't have time, but the spread of Islam. This is just this information is there. So much like in the Judaistic presentation that I did, it goes through how did Jews actually end up to 1948, because there's a whole history and understanding of that. Well, here's the history of the spread of Islam and what was actually taking place. But I am going to go forward to a couple of places to the actual first map there, Ashley. So in this, again, everything in yellow this is what was achieved. What's in red, kind of red-orange down in the bottom, those are the places where Muhammad actually visited during his lifetime. That is as far as the spread of Islam was during Muhammad's lifetime. The yellow is where it went under the 4 caliphs. And that's the reason when we had ISIS here a few years ago, it was the Islamic Caliphate. What they were attempting to achieve was to bring everything in the orange and yellow back under one Islamic rule. That was the goal of the Islamic Caliphate, which was defeated, but that's recent history, something we can kind of hold on to. But it's going back to those first original 4 caliphs because that's the area which they had conquered up to that point. And notice what's there: Jerusalem. Okay, so Jerusalem is in the center of that. And then we have further spread of that as well. Now, if you go to the next slide, what you have are the heavily Muslim. 90 to 100% Muslim are the dark green, and it goes down to the 1 to 7%. So 7 to 15% is the United States, is what we see. Why is Mexico and South America so non-Muslim? Roman Catholicism, okay? That is that's the hotbed of Catholicism. The what? Okay, whatever. I don't even know what you said. Okay, but the dark green, so you see North Africa, which is where another place that we love. I have to think about what I'm saying. Okay, nevertheless, there it is. And then clearly Saudi Arabia and everything, Afghanistan. So as you go north, that's Turkey, Afghanistan, and up into Uzbekistan, okay, up into Russia there. So, and then over here, the dark green that you see to the far right, well, that's Indonesia, Malaysia, right in through parts of New Zealand, all those areas there. Okay. Again, next you have kind of a geographical spread of Islam and through the years. Okay, again, not going to cover this today because you can read it. It's all there for you, and it's at least to the next one. Hold on the next one for just a second. So, the successors of Islam is a key. Abu Bakr is the first who was the father of Aisha. So Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. Those are the 4 caliphs. So that gives you their dates. So you see that Ali is the longest living. So my guess would be is that this understanding of Ali really leading the faith comes from the fact that not that he and Abu Bakr were at odds with one another, but he's the longest living of the 4 caliphs. So he's getting kind of the rule of Islam towards the end when everybody else is dead. So therefore, that's when a group starts to break off of followers of Ali. He's married to Fatima, the surviving daughter of Khadija and Muhammad. And he has, again, there are male sons born, but none of them survive infancy. So that's something that's if you want to know who all the caliphs were, that's where you get to that. All right, final thing we're going to look at is, well, I'll say it's the final thing. Remember what I told you guys the other day when I say final, I don't really mean final, that's just a transition point. Well, I'm realizing that. So again, I've talked about this a lot already, so I'm going to go a little bit quicker through this. So these are the 2 major groups, Shia and Sunni. Sunni follows what's known as the path, the journey of Islam. They choose their imams as consensus. So it's kind of what the community desires. They choose their imams based on consensus. Much like churches, a little bit like churches choose pastors, okay? But in Shia Islam, it's the party of Ali. It's a bloodline of these infallible imams. So much like the Pope can speak when he's sitting in the chair, it's called ex cathedra. It is, there's been lots of debate about this, but the meaning, especially early on, is when the Pope would sit in the chair, what he said was divine. I only bring that up to help understand this sense of Shia Islam, that these are infallible imams, that when they speak, what they say is true. So which group do you think creates more? I've already said this, haven't I? But which group creates the most radical Islam? Shia or Sunni? Yeah, you'd think Shia. It's not. Because if you have one of these infallible imams who say things and everybody believes it, well, that is how radical Islam basically develops, but it's largely within Sunni Islam, the most popular group, the one that's most prominent in the United States. But once again, when you have an imam who has a following and they want to radicalize, it's very easy for them to do that, even within Sunni Islam. So Sunni is 85% of all Islam is Sunni, and that's really important to remember as we look at these other groups. Now, if you look at these two groups, next slide, what you have is basic beliefs of these. So again, Shiites, if you look on the right, the number of imams, these infallible imams, so there are two major groups within Shiites. There are what's known as the Seveners and the Twelvers. Seven believe that there were 7 infallible imams, 12ers are 12 of those. But notice the Sunnis base their practices on the Quran and the Hadith, and the Shiites do not. So they base it only on the Quran itself, not the Hadith. Now, what's interesting about this is also that there is a messianic figure within Shia Islam. So, if you find that you're discussing something with someone who is Shiite, the term is called Mahdi. I believe it's Mahdi, Mahdi. Mahdi is the messianic figure within Islam. So it's a great bridge conversation if you're talking to someone who is Shiite. Just to mention, what are the characteristics of Mahdi within this? Just talking and opening up good open conversation questions. All right. Shiites, again, next slide, again, goes back to the bloodline of Ali, but specifically, if you'll notice that second point there, the martyrdom going back to the death of Hussein, who was the grandson. Now, if you don't have a son, the direct line, what you do have in the grandson is you do have the beginning of the direct bloodline. And so him being killed was, again, huge in this understanding of following Islam. And then Sufi Islam, again, this more mystical branch, mystical experience down at the bottom, symbols of poverty, garments of wool, which again, so here we get into what we would call ascetic, difficult lifestyle, creating things that are uncomfortable. That's one of the things that's taken place within this. Let's go on to the next group. So this is Wahhabi. So Wahhabi connected to the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia. And again, the easy way to recognize this group, the red and white headdress of the Prince of Saud is what we see. Wahhabi movement contests Sufism. So of the groups they really don't like, Sufis are the biggest group. And in Iran, there's a large group of Sufis. And so that's one of the issues that take place within that. Let's go to just the calendar and holy days. So what are the key holidays? Well, Eid al-Fitr is the biggest one. That is the breaking of the fast within Ramadan. So Ramadan is the full lunar month where you're fasting in the daylight hours. So we literally break the fast or breakfast. That is our morning meal because you have fasted for a certain number of hours. How many hours do you go 9 hours in the day without eating? Well, some people do, but not most people. So again, there's a longer period of time over the night hours. So Ramadan is fasting only during the daylight hours. So that's a key thing to understand. It's not as if people are fasting for 30 days. They are not. They are fasting during the daylight hours for 30 days. They are eating meals and drinking drinks. They just don't eat meals or drink drinks during the daylight hours. All right, in many Muslim countries, they change the entire work day and work only at night as a result of this. So places like Indonesia, places like Saudi Arabia, you change your work time when it's primarily Muslim. The Feast of Sacrifice is, again, during the month of Hajj. So when Abraham was commanded to sacrifice his son. So this is one of their key holidays, is the sacrifice of Ishmael, which again, according to Christianity is, and Judaism is Isaac. And then the birthday of the prophet is another key holiday. So let's talk about, and again, these notes aren't on there, so sharing our faith with Islam. I want to finish up with this. So again, I want to bring you back. If you want to understand how to share your faith with other people, one of the greatest examples is John chapter 4. Jesus with the woman at the well. So what did Jesus do? Just to remind you, he asked her for a drink. A Jewish male asked a Samaritan woman, who most Jewish males would never talk to Samaritan women. Jesus asked her for a drink. We miss the understanding of what's happening there. Jesus is placing himself underneath a woman's authority and underneath a Samaritan's woman authority by saying, would you get me a drink? He's saying, I have a dependence upon you. This is the way that we share our faith with people from other beliefs and other places. And that is by placing ourselves humbly within their understandings. Okay? So, we know within Islam, what are some things we have in common? We have prophets in common. So what would great questions be? How does Islam view Abraham? How does Islam view Moses, Noah? What is happening in the flood story within Islam? Where do you find that story? You don't find it in the Quran. You find it in the biblical version according to Islam. They hold that the Bible is true, but only as they translate it. Okay? Now that's not uncommon. When we get to Jehovah's Witnesses, it's the same thing they say. The Bible is true as we translate it. But and Mormonism, the same thing. So the key thing is to understand that all translations are not created equal. And we need to always investigate that. But in talking with someone who's Muslim, it's finding the common ground. Isa al-Misa, Jesus, is a huge common ground. What do they believe happened with Jesus? They believe that Jesus on the cross, that God exchanged him with the body of Judas. That Jesus was buried by his followers, and that he eventually ascended, but that Judas's body was replaced Jesus' body, and that is the body that actually went into the tomb. Where do they get the holiness of Muhammad? Very, very interesting. Somebody know, Terry does, see if anybody, Sydney does, the Greek word for the Holy Spirit is what? Do you remember? Come on, Terry. What? Pneuma? Nope. That's spirit. That is pneuma. That is spirit, but not Holy Spirit. Paraclete. Okay? So, there's a close word in Arabic that is close to paraclete. So what does Islam believe? That when Jesus is talking about there's another who's coming, who will give you comfort, who will be with you, who will instruct you in all the words that I have said. They believe that Paraclete is actually Muhammad. Okay? Now this gives you really great understanding of this. So go read John 15 or 13, 14, 16 and think about it as if a group of people is believing every time it mentions the Holy Spirit, they're really mentioning Muhammad who is coming. Okay? So again, and now, does that help you as a believer? No. This helps you to understand what a Muslim is thinking when they read portions of the Scripture. Okay? So understanding this, one of the best ways to approach a Muslim is to encourage them, could we have a study together? I wouldn't call it a Bible study. Could we have a study together? And the thing I would encourage you to study is the Sermon on the Mount, the words of Jesus, because they hold that these words are inspired. So let's talk about that. What do you think Jesus meant when he was saying this? So again, everything that we would do to encourage someone is to do what? It's to build a relationship with someone and to use terms that they understand. What are some terms that you think we might avoid after we've learned a little bit about Islam? Not that we should avoid them when talking with anyone else, but that we probably should avoid if we're going to try to be building a relationship with someone who's Muslim. Well, yes, bacon, that would be one. And Terry's a great example of that. Way to go, Terry. But how about any reference to Jesus as the Son of God? Okay? Or that God is Father. All of those human characteristic references is something that would be very offensive to someone who is Muslim. Should you eventually get to that? Absolutely. But in building a relationship, leave some of those things for later. What you can talk about is they revere Jesus, and so do I. They revere Abraham. Well, so do I. Let's talk about, hey, where are the stories of Abraham in the Quran? And what do they say? Well, here's what this says in my Bible. What does it say in the Bible that the translation that you follow? Just open dialogue types of questions of finding out where they're at and where they're coming from and what they understand. And then beginning to talk about, well, could we talk about some of the differences of our faith? Because we've found so many similarities. What are some of the differences? Well, they hold that that Christians don't believe in a single deity, but in three, that we're really polytheistic. Well, trying to help them understand. Now, again, my best explanation of that, I've already given it to you, but I will quickly do it. It's in three phases, three parts of life. The creation, where the Father is preeminent, the Son and the Spirit are totally submitted to the Father. Now, why is this important? Well, because I had a Muslim student who eventually went to Harvard that said, I've never gotten this, and I get it now. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to stick with that illustration. But Father and Son, both individual persons of God, but fully submitted to one another. Salvation, Jesus is preeminent. Father, Son, supportive roles, submitting to Jesus in that understanding of the Godhead. Sanctification, Holy Spirit preeminent. Jesus and the Father both existing, but submitting to the person of the Holy Spirit as he lives in our lives. Because again, to understand the Trinity, I believe best, it is Father, Son, and Spirit wholly submitted to one another in the person of the Godhead, creating not a unit, but a unity, three in one. Another great example of that is what a Christian marriage should be. Two people mutually submitted to one another into the things that God, roles that God gives them for particular things. So, ways to bring all of these things together in some knowledge base that we have about Islam and the opportunity to bring somebody into the discussion. All right, Q&A for the last couple minutes. Yes, Fred?
Do they have a list of the 124,000? Did they name every one of the prophets?
There must be a list. It's not in the Quran. There's not 124,000 names within the Quran. But what we do know is that many are shared between the prophets, but there has to be a list somewhere. I've never seen the entire list. And I've certainly not read 124,000 names. It's a very good question. All right? What I meant to say is Q&A of things that I probably can't answer. So go ahead and what else? Amy. Okay. Mm-hmm. The teaching. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Most Muslims that I find aren't really practicing. Now, that's not true of other Muslims that you will find, because there's certainly mosques have a good group of people who are there, but they're reading it. And so let's just talk about why do you think a lot of Muslims don't read the Quran? They don't know Arabic. But everything points to the fact that they have to do these things in Arabic. So they will learn certain things like the Shahada. Well, inshallah, I can't remember what the rest of it is, but inshallah just means if God will. God will, inshallah. But they don't know Arabic. So what does Islam said? It's only holy if you know Arabic and you speak it. Well, if you don't speak it, then it's not okay for you just to go grab an English Quran off the shelf. That's not allowed in Islam. We can have an English Quran and read it, but they're not supposed to. So that's one of the reasons why there's kind of this separation between those two. Now, a man that I love that happens to be in West Africa, he came to faith in Christ by reading the Bible and understanding Adam's sin, and the realization that if Adam sinned and was separated from God, what chance would he have? He just began to contemplate, well, if Adam, who is a revered prophet within Islam, and he made this mistake and was separated from God as a result of it, what chance did he have as a kid growing up in West Africa? And that led him to an understanding of the sacrifice that Jesus had made for his behalf. And his father was a mullah, a teacher of Islam, which he still has a great relationship with to this day, but he's still Muslim. Shauna? Yeah. So they believe that Jesus, that God took him. I said he was buried. According to Islam, he's not buried. Sorry. Well, so there's some that say swooned, and there's some that say that God took him to heaven. So yeah, so it's really that he doesn't die. God takes him to heaven. And furthermore, that he will return and marry and have children and will die then. Now, not by every group, but that's a major belief. But that God replaces Jesus' body